guys, so for this roguelite review, I'll be reviewing Griftlands, which is a new roguelite by Klei that's still in alpha early access. It's a card game RPG with different characters you can play as and experience different stories. This review will be in a slightly different format because it's an early access game, it's not fully released yet. So first I'll do an overview of the game, I'll do an evaluation of the game and the gameplay itself, and I'll compare it to Spire, which is another popular roguelite card game. So overall, Griftlands Alpha does a really good job of being a fun, engaging card game roguelite. The game itself has some conversations, has some story elements, and has two main types of combat. So there's combat, it's a typical type of fighting, you just, fight to get enemies to surrender, fight to kill them, that kind of stuff. And then you have negotiation fighting. And negotiation fighting is a little more unique. You deploy arguments and you deal damage to enemies' arguments. And it's one of the more unique elements of the game. It seems a little overwhelming at first. Definitely the first couple of negotiations I had, I didn't really understand what's going on. Once you kind of understand it, once you get it down, it's pretty fun. It's a nice different take on sort of the typical standard combat fighting style you see in a lot of games. As of right now, there's two different characters you can play as, and they each have their own campaign and combat style. So the first character, Sal, is a little more standard in terms of mechanics, and the story is also a little more straightforward. It's sort of a classic revenge story. Then there's the second character, Rook, who feels a little more complicated. I don't mean that in a bad way. There's an inherent gambling mechanic in the negotiations, so you flip a coin a lot, and if there's heads, you get certain things. There's tails, or as they call it in the game, snails, you get some different sort of buffs and mechanics. So for example, the starting coin, if you get heads, you get 1 composure, which is the equivalent of like 1 defense, 1 block on your arguments. You get snails or tails, you deal 1 damage on your argument. And these heads and snails can interact with your cards as well. And the combat for Rook is a little different as well. So there's this importance on managing the charge mechanic, which is sort of this resource you can build up and spend. And that resource, that charge, will affect a lot of other cards and how they interact with each other. Each of these two characters have a different pool of cards to draw from, different pool of conditions they can apply to enemies, which is good. I'm glad those characters don't have too many similarities. They definitely feel pretty different. They're in the same world, so the stories they have a lot of the same lore and that kind of stuff, but they do feel pretty different from each other. And I'd also say the story for Rook is more engaging than the story for Sal. There's just a lot more duplicity, there's a lot more sort of, you don't know what's going on, who do you want to support, what are the actual motives and stuff, whereas the story for Sal is a lot more straightforward, as I said earlier. Also some long-term buffs in the form of graphs. They occasionally have some drawbacks, but usually they're pretty straightforward buffs. So for example, it might be it boosts your max health, or you get, you deal 3 bleeding on your first attack each turn, that kind of stuff. Those are the examples of the kind of long-term buffs that graphs can be. But also a lot of RPG-like mechanics. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of conversations you have with people. There's a lot more story in it than there are in a lot of other roguelites. People in the game can also love, like, dislike, or hate you, and those can affect how the game plays out. So if someone loves you, you get a boon, you get a buff that'll follow you along in all your fights. And if someone hates you, you'll get a bane, a sort of negative debuff that'll similarly follow along with all your fights. Additionally, if someone likes you or loves you, and you fight someone else and that character is around, they might join in the fight. And similarly, if someone hates you, they might turn the fight against you if you fight someone around them. And also some classic progression mechanics where you unlock more cards for future runs as you play through them. You get XP after you complete each run. Successful or not, it sort of helps you unlock more cards. There's also prestige mode, which will increase difficulty in various ways. Overall, I'd say the game's average difficulty, there's some mechanics that will help you complete the game the first time. So for example, each time you fail a run, you can keep something between the runs, whether it's sort of a graft, whether it's a good card, you can sort of choose. There's also an ability to retry each level once. So there are 5 days in each run, and you can restart once each day. It took me about 9 hours to get my first clear with Sal. Haven't got one with Rook yet because that campaign isn't finished. But, it's not the hardest roguelite. Again, I'd say it's about average difficulty as far as roguelites go. But it does definitely benefit from replaying it. If for no other reason, you sort of learn the events, learn what might be a good choice conversation-wise, whether it might be wise to try to negotiate or do a combat fight in certain instances. There's a lot of stuff you can learn that'll help you across runs. So that's sort of my description of Griftlands Alpha. Honestly, I've had a really fun time playing it. It's nice to have a good story-driven roguelite. Sal's story isn't that complex, but it's still fun to learn about the world. It's still fun to play through everything. Rook's story, the second character, is more enjoyable in my opinion, as I talked about earlier. There's a little more sort of these different factions you're playing each other. You can sort of choose between them. I think it's a little more backstabbing involved. So I think it's fun as it is. It's unfinished at the moment though, so who knows, maybe I'll find the finished project less fun, or maybe I'll find it even more enjoyable. We'll have to wait and see. Also a fast mode you can enable that allows you to skip all the dialogue basically and sort of skip through the story. So if you're not a story person, or after you played through the game once or twice and you want to skip through all the dialogue, there's the ability to do that as well, which is really good. Something I was worried about with having a story-driven roguelite is that I was worried that having to play through the story would be annoying, having to repeat dialogue would be annoying, so the ability to basically skip all that is really good in regards to the replayability of this game. That being said, there's still some value in learning the various events to be able to know what the best outcomes are. So there's some instances where it's best to negotiate with someone. There's some times where it's best to just not negotiate negotiate at all and just go straight into combat. And so after you sort of get a feel for some types of events that happen, you can sort of use that knowledge to sort of determine, okay, if I negotiate here, I have a fight afterwards, I get better rewards. If I, just go straight for the fight, it's a little easier, but I have worse rewards. That kind of stuff is useful knowledge between the runs. The game is a nice mix of RPG combat elements and sort of the deck builder card game elements, and sort of the way it mixes them together just works out really well. I wouldn't say that it's like revolutionary or anything, but I think that the mix is somewhat unique. I think the mix is definitely fun, and there's enough variety in the decks with different play styles that are there that it keeps things fresh between runs. It doesn't feel like you have to run the same thing every single time. Additionally, the negotiation fights are a really good addition to this game, and they're one of the more unique elements. It's definitely a unique take on that sort of just classic turn-based combat. You sort of, build your arguments, and your arguments help you and like attack the enemy, and it's different in a good way. It's also nice to have two different decks in play, so you sort of can flesh them out differently, and the way that you interact with these two decks to be able to solve quests. Do you want to, as I mentioned earlier, do you want to negotiate here, use a negotiation deck, or do you want to go straight into combat? So it is really helpful to have both the decks be good, but at the end of the day, you're not going to fight the final boss of the negotiation. The final boss is going to be a combat fight, so it's really the most important to have a good combat deck, but a good negotiation deck can really compensate for a bad combat deck for a lot of the game, but certainly not all of it. That said, at the end of the day, the negotiation deck is really just another take on turn-based combat. So I think it's a good take. I think it's unique. It has a lot of elements that are different, but it's not like it's a totally new thing. So, and that's, good and bad. Good because you eventually pick it up and sort of learn how to do it without much difficulty, but bad, I guess, in the sense that it's not this entirely new thing. The game also has enough progression to be satisfying in my opinion. So, it has the classic, as you play through runs, whether you're successful or not, you get XP and then you can unlock more cards, you can unlock new skins for your characters, new outfits, and there's prestige modes, which are basically after you play through once, you can play through it again on a higher prestige in order to, have some additional challenges, a little more difficulty, and sort of climb up the prestige ladder, if you will. There's also cross-run progression at times, so you can keep something from each run into the next run. So if you fail, you can maybe keep some of your money, you can maybe keep one of your cards, you can maybe keep one of your graphs, and that sort of makes the later runs easier, which sort of helps you get that first clear. And you can also retry each day once. So there's 5 days in each campaign, there's 5 days for each character, and once in each day you can retry. So if you die on day 4, you can retry the 4th day once, so you don't have to restart completely. And that's sort of a nice little thing there to be helpful in sort of you getting your first clear and not be too frustrated, which is particularly helpful too because a lot of the runs of this game can run pretty long. There can be multiple hours if you're going for a full clear. And so having that is definitely nice, where something that I wouldn't think would really be necessary in a lot of other roguelites with much shorter runs. The game is also still in early access right now, as I mentioned, or maybe it's technically an alpha, but there's not much difference between those things. So it's not quite finished gameplay-wise. And there's the second character, as I mentioned, Rook, who's unfinished. The story there isn't quite done. There's going to be a third character on release, so I'm really excited to see what they do with all of these. I think what it has right now is really good, but I think it, could definitely use more to retail for the full price that it does. And I didn't really have any bugs with Sal, the first character, at all, but I did have some bugs with Rook. Not really any of them were game breaking, but it was still kind of annoying. But that's what you get when you play early access games. So now I'm going to compare and contrast Slay the Spire and Griftlands Alpha in terms of their overall gameplay and other things. So if you're not interested in the section at all, feel free to skip to my summary verdict section, which I'll link in the description below. So why am I comparing these two games? Slay the Spire is one of the most popular roguelites out there. I have a review of it on my channel. You can look at it if you're interested. And it's another example of a card game roguelite. So if there's these two card game roguelites, how are they similar? How are they different? Similarities, obviously, as I just mentioned, they're both card games, and they play very similar in terms of how you acquire the cards, and even sort of how the cards themselves are used. So in each of them, you start out with 3 action points, 3 sort of like energy, and the card costs feel very similar between the two games. Additionally, in both the games, you can either get graphs, as they're called Griftlands Alpha, or relics, as they're called in Slay the Spire, that sort of have these long-term changes. Usually it's long-term buffs that help you throughout the game. However, the upgrade process in Griftlands is a little bit different than it is in Slay the Spire. It's much more straightforward. In Griftlands, you just use the card. If you use it enough times, you can upgrade it, where it's a little bit harder to do in Slay the Spire. However, the biggest difference, I would say, in terms of Griftlands Alpha versus Slay the Spire, is that Griftlands Alpha plays a lot more like an RPG. There's a lot more RPG elements. You have the dialogue, you have the story, you can have a bunch of allies in combat, which isn't really a thing in Slay the Spire at all. And so there's that RPG element that make it a very different game in terms of just how it straight up looks, in terms of how it feels in a lot of different ways. Additionally, the negotiation fights in Griftlands Alpha are very different from the fights in Slay the Spire. The combat fights in Griftlands Alpha are pretty similar in some ways to the combat fights in Slay the Spire in terms of like how they play. I mean, obviously the cards themselves are pretty unique, but if you just looked at it from like a pure mechanics standpoint, they're very similar. Another aspect of that RPG side of Griftlands is that you just have a lot more decisions and they affect the game in much stronger ways, whereas in Slay the Spire, it's a much more linear path, although, obviously you have some choice in choosing your path. It's not like you can skip a bunch of stuff. You can't choose to negotiate instead of do combat. You can't choose to, try to befriend someone, to have an ally. You can't choose to purchase a pet, those kind of things that you can do in Griftlands that don't really make sense for Slay the Spire. So it's hard to really compare totally because Griftlands Alpha is still, access, it's still an alpha, but I think it has a lot of potential. Slay the Spire has a lot of replayability. It's still my most played roguelite right now, but Griftlands definitely has a lot of potential. They have a similar sort of ascension prestige system where you can replay levels with higher difficulty. So we'll see. Definitely something you should check out. If you played Slay the Spire, really liked it, and you're interested in RPGs at all, I think it sort of can scratch that itch in a different way, in a different setting and stuff like that. Now for my overview, summary, and verdict of Griftlands. So it's a really fun game as is right now and has a lot of potential for the future. So as a whole, I would definitely say to check it out if you're interested at all. I had a lot of fun with it. I'm really excited to see how it shapes out. While it has some similarities to Slay the Spire, there are also a lot of big differences in terms of how it plays. Make it another fun roguelite to check out for those who have enjoyed Slay the Spire in the past or currently still. So overall, I'd recommend checking it out as it keeps getting updated. You don't necessarily need to buy it right now. It's still in the fairly early phase. As I mentioned, it's an alpha. Got it for $5 in the Epic Store game sale. And, I've definitely got my $5 worth. Whether it's worth full price, whether it's worth, 20, 25 bucks, whatever they're going to sell it for, I'm not sure yet. But I've definitely enjoyed it for what it is right now. And I'm sure I'm going to enjoy it in the future when they add the next character, when they finish Rook's storyline. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out my other roguelite videos, the link in the description below, or if you're interested, you can see some of my shorter 2-minute reviews of my other videos. If you like the stuff that you're seeing, feel free to subscribe as well and like this video. Thanks.